Today on Let's Talk Love, I'm joined by the beautiful, intelligent, and super relatable Sylvie Houkajian. Sylvie goes through the different attachment styles we all have that were formed in childhood and how these styles affect how we relate to each other as adults. We also talk about the different types of boundaries and how important it is to set boundaries and also honor the boundaries those we love have set. This is a chock full conversation. I hope you enjoy and learn so much along with me. Welcome to the Let's Talk Love podcast, where we flip the script on outdated narratives and cliches about love and relationships. I'm your host, Robin Ducharme, founder of Real Love Ready. This podcast is for anyone who wants to be better at love, regardless of relationship status. We'll talk about the intimate connections in our lives and the challenges and complexities inherent in those partnerships. Through our no-holds-barred interviews with global experts, we'll gain insight about ourselves and learn new skills to improve our relationships. Because when we learn to love better, we make the world a better place. Are you ready for open and honest conversations about love? Let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Let's Talk Love. I'm so excited to welcome my new friend, Sylvie Houkajian. I don't know if I pronounced it correctly.
You did it very well.
It's such a beautiful last name. And Sylvie and I have worked together a number of times now, and she's one of our experts that's going to be sharing so much wisdom around new things that I'm not familiar with, attachment theory. And this is why I really wanted to have you on, Sylvie, today. And so welcome, Sylvie, to Let's Talk Love.
Yay. What an honor to be here. Every time we collaborate, it's just always such a joy. So thank you for having me.
On your website, you say, my sole mission is to support others in being deeply and soulfully self-connected and to use their self-understanding to create fulfilling relationships with others. As a relationship coach, I guide others to get to know themselves more intimately in a safe and collaborative way. I teach people how to communicate with self-responsibility, assertiveness, vulnerability, and boundaries. These are things that we all need. So I had to quote you on that because I thought that just, you did sum up a lot of what your work is all about. And I wanted to ask your personal story because, of course, when you share your personal story on your website about how you were an actress and then you transitioned to getting your master's in psychology, marriage and family therapy, and where you are now with your thriving coaching practice. So I'd just love to hear a little bit of your story.
Yeah, it's always so interesting to think about the many lives we have in one lifetime, right?
Yes.
And when I think about my acting journey, it was an intuitive pull to pursue that field because I think for me, I was a very, very performative child, very much like a kinesthetic learner, which is very much like I process and learn through the expressive arts, like whether that's through singing or performing or acting or writing. And I was naturally drawn to acting because I was able to really embody different parts of myself that were very repressed and shut down. So I could do a role and I could feel the angry part of me. I could take a role and feel into my jealousy. And it was such a beautiful way for me to really, integrate these many parts of myself that I think, our culture, I say our culture, but here in the West, I don't know, I can't speak for other parts of the world, but where do we get to really express the fullness of our emotions? Like really, Robin, like full on,
Yes.
right? And so for me, that was a place where I got to do that. But then I also, I got to the point where I was like, yes, it's beautiful that I'm able to express these feelings through an acting role or through this kind of thing. But it started to not feel enough. And I was like, okay, I need to actually process my childhood. I need to process what it is that these feelings are connected to so I could integrate them more intellectually as well. And so that's what led me to to pursue, a degree in psychology in the therapy world. And then I started to want to teach people what I learned, which was like relationship skills, like how to set
Yes.
boundaries, how do you be vulnerable? Like I literally had no idea, like, what does that even mean? How do you know you're doing it? Right.
Yes.
All of these different skills, how to be like reciprocal in relationships. So it's not just about my stuff or, get lost with catering to other people's needs. So I started to collect. I started to just pay attention through my 10 years of combined, therapy and coaching. So like, what are the areas that people keep coming to me for? And I kind of fine-tuned the different areas which you just read about. And I want to make things practical for people because that's what
Mhm.
really helped me. I like giving people language, not so they can just say it how I would say it, but to help them discover their own languaging for how they would want to communicate things to their partners, to their friends. And so it started off really, it evolved through that journey for me from really wanting to do that for myself and working with different therapists, working with coaches, and then paying attention to what people needed and slowly starting to craft my coaching practice towards those things.
Wow. And I think when it comes down to it, like you said, it's about having the skills because most of us are not raised with these amazing role models that are teaching us the best relational skills. So this is really important stuff. And this is what Real Love Ready is all about. And Let's Talk Love really
Mm,
is we can all read the books and know the theories. But when it comes down to it, we need the strategies, the tools, the language
mm,
to change our relationships. So,
absolutely.
and to grow our relationships. So you're doing beautiful work, Sylvie.
Thank you so much. Honored. And you guys are creating such a beautiful platform for bringing all of this wisdom together. So it's an honor to be here, truly.
Oh, thank you. So, Sylvie, I wanted to invite our audience into the world of attachment styles because I really don't know much about this, and I would like to learn more. And so, can we talk? And you do. I mean, you're an expert in this field, and so can we talk about the origins of attachment theory?
Absolutely. Yes. So what I love to do with attachment theories, I really love to simplify it for people, but also
Yes.
without robbing the nuance and the complexity of our human experience, right? Because frameworks can be watered down and we don't want to do that. But frameworks can also really help us to make sense of our earlier experiences so that we can see ourselves through those frameworks and then utilize the skills within them to create, like you said, better, healthier, more connected, reciprocal relationships. So, attachment theory is a framework that was developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. And essentially, they started to look at the way little children were bonded to their primary caregiver. So that usually is a mother. But it can absolutely be a father, it can be an uncle, it can be a grandparent, it can be whoever is the person, the primary person that was in charge of being the one to soothe the baby. Obviously, parents can take roles, like they can shift roles and they can, alternate, but there's usually one person that is responsible for doing that most of the time. So again, this isn't about blaming. I want to, really, really preface with that. This isn't about blaming mothers or blaming parents or blaming people. It's more about just understanding what that dynamic was like so
Mhm.
that you can understand how it's now being mirrored and replicated in your adult relationships. So with a caregiver, and I'm going to just kind of go through them a little bit.
Yes, please.
Okay. So when there's a deeply secure attachment happening between a child and a caregiver, that means that the caregiver is present for the child and responsive a good amount of the time. It's not perfection. It just means that, oops, I made a boo-boo. I didn't respond well. I didn't soothe the baby in the way that it needed. Let me adjust. Let me, figure out what the baby needs, adapt. So it's not about perfection, but it's about having a parent or a caregiver that's just present and who's trying to find what the baby needs and adapting in an appropriate way to that. That is
Mhm.
what creates a secure attachment. When there's a caregiver that is available sometimes, like really on point and really there and really present, but then is maybe not. Maybe they're really busy with work, or maybe they're just so distracted with something they're struggling with. Maybe they have a health challenge happening, and they're not really able to be there and there's like this split experience that happens for the child. The child can develop an anxiety, like, wait a minute, my caregiver's here sometimes, but they're not here other times. So when they're not there, that experience in adulthood can develop into feeling anxiety in relationships. Like, wait a minute, you
Mm,
didn't call me back, you didn't text me back. Oh my gosh, you're not coming. So that fear of
yeah.
abandonment can start to develop. And it makes so much sense, right? When you
Yes.
understand that earlier experience. And then there's dismissive avoidant attachment, which is all about a caregiver being not really responsive to a child's emotional needs or physical needs enough of the time, or very rarely. So that child starts to, instead of like having this co-regulatory emotional experience where, a child learns to self-soothe themselves through that mirrored experience with the caregiver. So if they're not getting that, they start to auto-regulate, meaning they self-soothe themselves. But what happens is in adulthood, then they can really struggle in relationships because having someone else like want to be in their presence and want that deep attachment can feel really threatening because they're kind of
Mm,
like an island, is what
yeah.
Dr. Stan Tatkin refers to it as. Like, I can take care of myself. They grow up into people that are very self-sufficient, very responsible. Even as children, they can be really responsible. So leaning into relationships can be a lot more challenging for them. And then there's a fourth type that came up much later through Mary Main and Judith Solomon's work, which is disorganized. It's also called fearful avoidant attachment as well. And that's when you have a caregiver that is frightening, or let's say they had a lot of unresolved traumas of their own that were never dealt with. So a child can both be bonded to this caregiver but also be afraid of them. So there sometimes can be abuse
Mm,
in this scenario.
mhm.
And so this person can grow up into their adult relationships to really craving and yearning intimacy in their relationships because they had that closeness, but they're also very scared. So falling in love can be really scary for them because it can feel like a loss of control. And even just committing to a relationship can be like, oh my gosh, I'm trapped. And it's so subconscious, right, Robin? And that's why it's like,
Yes.
a lot of times
Gosh.
people come to me and they're like, but I don't remember what happened. I just feel like this in my adult relationship. So it's not so much about remembering the specifics of what happened. It's more about honoring this is how you feel in relationships. So let's honor that. Let's have compassion for that. And then we can kind of work with creating some skills and some soothing for the nervous system to help counteract and repair some of those earlier experiences. So that's
Yes.
a little went
Thank
through all
you.
of
It's like a hard wiring,
yes,
right? So
yes.
is it within the first 2 years that this is happening? Or is it the childhood? Is it from birth to, like, what age have the scientists and people that have studied this, the researchers found out that this is really developed, those stages, the ages?
Most of the research points to it being a pretty short 2 to 3 year window. So it's the
Mm,
first few years. Of course, like, other things are impacting a child, high school
yes.
experiences, like all kinds of things are impacting, but that attachment piece, right?
Mm,
The ability to bond and attach to a romantic partner, especially, but also to friends, that's according to the attachment theory framework, that is what becomes mirrored through what the attachment was like in childhood.
yeah. One of our community questions was about is attachment theory, or is attachment, sorry, style, can it be developed in adulthood? And I think you've just
Mm.
answered that, right? Like that's a different thing. Like if you're experiencing trauma as an adult or a teenager, in a relationship with your parents or some other individual, that's different, or an experience that's different than what you're talking about with the bonding and the,
Yes.
okay.
Exactly. And that's why I always, encourage people to not get fixated on the labeling,
No.
of course, if it's
Yes.
helpful, but yes, if you have a terrible relationship with someone who is completely shutting you down and is not really responsive, and you start to develop anxiousness, that makes sense based on the relationship. What happens with people that tend to be more secure, however, is they are because they have that framework of knowing what it feels like to be in relationships that is really responsive. They have more trust. They also feel more confident to teach people how to show up for them. So if they start to sense someone's not going to show up for them, they're more likely to leave. And so it's also helpful to understand attachment theory because
Mm.
it can show us what we're vulnerable to, right? Like if we had anxiety, we can probably know that we're going to tend to be drawn to people that help to recreate that pattern. Doesn't mean you can't change that relationship dynamic, but it just means, I better pay attention to, is this relationship, does it have potential to grow and be healthy? Or is it going to just continue this pattern of anxiety and loop us over and over again in a way that's just extremely painful?
Mhm. So, seeing how attachment style does form in the first few years, how can we learn to change our style or work with it as adults to better our relationships? You just explained that really.
And that's the biggest question, right? That people want to know is like, how do I fix it? How do I change it? And the beautiful
Mm.
news is you don't have to become this like different person. You get to still be you. You get to still have, if you I have anxious and avoidant tendencies and they're still there. I still have them. And what I help people with and what I remind them of is that it's about creating new agreements in your relationships that are going to protect your relationships. So, if I know that when I get anxiety, I'm going to send my partner a bunch of text messages like, "Where are you? Where are you? Where are you?" I'm going to probably want to work on some self soothing and, like, okay, this is what I want to do, but this is not the best use of
Yeah.
my relationship skills. Let me create some tools in my own tool belt so that I can take care of myself. Maybe I call a friend, or maybe I've worked on this and I know enough that, you know what? I have enough evidence that my partner has shown up for me. My partner communicates that they love me. Everything is okay. So, with anxious clients, we do a lot of work around that self soothing, but also coming up with agreements in your relationship, like your partner or your partners or a friend, knowing what your sensitivities are and being willing to work with you. Like me and my partner in the beginning of our relationship in my past, I used to be in a relationship where we didn't touch base until the end of the day. Like we literally, the whole day would go by, we wouldn't communicate. And that would drive me bananas.
Yeah,
And I
because
tolerated that.
that's not how you want, like, you were wanting more.
Yes, I needed a checkpoint, but I didn't know that. I didn't know how to communicate it. I didn't
Mhm.
understand my wiring of my anxiety. And when I got in my relationship with my now husband, that was one of the first things I said to him, like, I really need us to have a check-in and first thing in the morning that calms my anxiety and it just makes me feel relaxed the rest of the day. And we created an agreement around that. It doesn't mean it's perfect, but just knowing that that's something that we do to come back to each other and to know that my anxiety is acknowledged and cared for, that makes a big difference for again protecting and nurturing and rewiring some of those earlier patterns.
Mhm. So this is all around what we're talking about. One of our community questions is, how would you recommend talking openly
Mm.
about attachment issues with someone that you have witnessed has attachment issues, but may not be very aware of their attachment issues? Is there a good way to communicate that?
I actually get this question quite a bit, Robin, and I
Yeah.
think it's really interesting because I often tell people, there's really no way of getting this wrong as long as you're bringing this up in a way that's sensitive and not blaming or shaming,
Mhm.
right? You can literally get away with saying anything. And I think, if I were to give just a practical example of what that could look like, it would be something like, I'm learning about this new map. It's called attachment theory, attachment styles. It's so fascinating. What I saw in myself through discovering this map was X, Y, and Z. I noticed that this is how I show up. And this is what I would love to actually work on and be better at in our relationship. Would you become like, would you be okay with exploring this or talking about this or reading with this or doing this course with me? And kind of inviting them more from a place of, this is how it shows up for
Mhm.
me rather than this is what I think is wrong with you, which is usually how we invite people to therapy, right? It's like, you need therapy.
Yeah. I'm good, but I'm going. You have to come.
Exactly. And seeing if there's an open space to talk about it. And some people are not a fan of the labeling of these kind of things. So
No.
I would say if they're not, then just be human about it, right? Just say, I have anxious tendencies, or I notice that when I come home from work, if I have more avoidant tendencies, maybe I just need a little bit of time to myself after work so I can decompress before connecting to you. And that's what I love about the map because it gives permission to take care of our nervous systems without neglecting our relationships, right? And until we know how to take care of ourselves and ask about what we need, oftentimes it can be hard to show up for who we're in relationship with because we
Mhm.
can feel stuck. Like we can make things all about ourselves. And so I want people to feel empowered to actually say, hey, this would be really helpful. This would make me feel safe. What do you need? What would help you? How can I show up as a better partner? And it's wild that we don't ask these questions, right? Like
Yes.
automatically, like so many people don't. I didn't in my previous relationships. Did you, Robin?
Well, no, it was after it ended.
As after it ended.
And then there's a lot of reflection.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So those are
Yes.
those are some ways that you can enter that world without making it just about you chose because we chose that person, right? We chose that person for a reason. So they have
Mhm.
strengths. And maybe we can start with that. We can start with the things we love, the things we admire. We obviously want to pursue a relationship with them. And then we can bring up, um, I notice this thing that you do. It's okay to also bring that up. I notice sometimes when I want to connect with you, I feel like maybe it overwhelms you, or is that true for you? And how can I help you so that you don't feel that way? And just kind of exploring from a place of curiosity. They might be absolutely like have no idea, especially with people that have a more avoidant tendencies. They tend to not be in touch with their needs. They literally can be so deeply struggle with having language for their internal world. So that's where a course or like some kind of education or even just listening to a podcast, it can be such a simple access point to help them even start understanding what their needs are in the first place.
Yeah. I like I like the wording there. It was, you're approaching it with your partner with curiosity, and that's very gentle.
Yes.
I like that.
Don't we want to be like approached that way, right?
Yes.
I mean, I don't want to feel like something's wrong with me.
No, I know. It's just so easy to point the finger sometimes. It's terrible, but
Oh,
it
it's so
is just
easy.
sometimes the reality. So another community question is, I was married for 15 years to someone who was very avoidant. And I've always thought I had a reasonably secure attachment style. But over the past few years of dating in my 40s, I've noticed that I might have some avoidant tendencies. When a guy I'm dating expresses too much interest or shows emotion, my guard goes up and it makes me think they are a little needy or too eager.
Mm,
I'm beginning to think that perhaps my ex husband and I both had avoidant styles. And although I was maybe less avoidant than him, his detachment and lack of emotion was actually a comfortable space for me.
mm,
I had a very loving home growing up and have many other healthy relationships in my life, but romantic relationships are proving hard for me. I had been thinking that the problem is just that I've never met the right person. But now I'm starting to question whether my hesitancy to let anyone get close to me is also about my attachment style. How do I heal this?
mm. Wow, this is such a beautifully framed and clear description of someone's experience with this. And
Mhm.
one of the things that I love about Dr. Stan Tacken is he actually says people usually have more similar attachment styles than they don't, which is I found to be really interesting through his research. Um, and
Mhm.
if we're having that kind of response to someone, right? If we're feeling there's that overarching normal of like, look, we all can be in a relationship and once in a while be like, my partner's annoying. They're getting on my
Yes.
nerves, or
Like
that's
I need some
everybody.
space.
Yeah, that's everybody. So I think let's
Yes.
first normalize that because that a little bit of that is totally understandable, especially if you're feeling stressed. But if it feels extreme or it prevents you from really developing a connection or feeling intimate or building a bond with someone, that's when it can be really significant to explore and look at. So, one of the interesting things, Robin, that I found with people that tend to have dismissive avoidant tendencies is that they tend to describe their childhoods as good, as actually really
Mm.
positive. And because it can be really challenging for them to get in touch with their painful feelings, because again, there's a lot of repression, a lot of suppressed their emotions they had to tend to. So that means a lot of that was shut down. A child can't regulate their difficult emotions. So it just literally gets closed off, shut down, compartmentalized. And so I don't want to go there if I'm now an adult, like everything was fine. Everything's fine. That's what happens whenever I talk to someone that has
Mm.
avoidant tendency. So I would wonder if, not to say that what this person is saying is not true, but I would I would invite them to maybe explore and dig a little bit of deeper into when you fell, when you were in pain, when you were struggling. Who did you go to for support and comfort? And what did that look like? And
Mhm.
that's one way of kind of starting to unravel how was that attachment in reality, right? Because again, we have the fantasy version of our parents, and then we have the reality version, which, again, not to say that we expect perfection from our parents, but if we are to do the necessary grieving work, we have to see them as, we have to acknowledge the positive things, and we also have to be willing to look at the reality of things, so we can deal with ourselves and we
Mhm.
can create healthier relationships. So I would first wonder about that. um, and then also exploring past relationships, right? Were there any other relationships that maybe felt traumatic? Was there infidelity that was never dealt with? Was there any kind of cruelty? Um, and I would start to explore that. And then that exploration can help to integrate and make space of like, oh, it's not so much about my partner, it's also about like what's happening for me. And
Yeah.
then, so this is very layered, right? Like it's never just like a
No, of
one
course. It's
directional
yeah,
answer.
we're layered human beings.
Layered human beings. Then it would, and when this person is clearly saying that they have this kind of responsiveness with other, like a lot of people, it's not just this one person. But then it is noticing, does this partner, how is the way that they're approaching me? Are they approaching me? Are they pressuring me when they want to, do certain things with me? Do they blame me? Do they criticize me? Because if they are doing those things, then it's understandable that we would retreat or feel annoyed or even start to feel like this, repulsion from that person. So just taking some time to kind of explore and look at all the different angles, including the family of origin, childhood experiences, and also reflecting on past relationships. And then we want to look at, what are some ways we can start to increase or build a higher tolerance for intimacy? And then that would be kind of like the final tier to work through that. And that will look different depending on what this person discovers within their own internal exploration. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Wow, that's great.
I'm
So
glad.
let's talk about boundaries because obviously these are like super important for everyone to have healthy relationships with ourselves and with others. In simple terms, I would love to hear your description of what a boundary is.
Hmm. The simplest description of boundaries would be, it is a limit that protects the integrity of your well-being, whether that's your emotional well-being, your intellectual well-being, your spiritual well-being. So it basically, it's a way of protecting yourself. It's a limit that protects the well-being of you. And that can be, honoring your capacity boundaries, or how you want to be treated, or setting a boundary when somebody, comes into your space or minimizes or invalidates your experiences. um, so there's, four different frameworks of boundaries that I love to speak about from the work of Raquel Lerner. And they are emotional boundaries, physical boundaries, intellectual, and spiritual. And we can dig into those a little bit if you would like.
Yes, please, please.
Yes. Great. So this is another reason why, I do a lot of work with exploring our family of origin experiences, because they shape so much of how they shape they're literally the relational lens in which we relate to others and how we see others, how we trust, how we repair.
Yeah.
And understanding, were there certain boundaries that maybe were not, maybe people weren't as sensitive to, but that affected me later in life. So according to the work of Raquel Lerner, our emotional boundaries, they could be violated or injured in our childhood if we had a parent who shared intrusive experiences with us, or maybe shared things that weren't really appropriate for our age, or talked
Mhm.
about, maybe our parents divorced and now a parent is venting to me about the other parent or putting me in the middle. So like our
Yep.
emotional experience can be really violated, right? Yes. That one resonates. Yes.
And that would result in a boundary being so the emotional, so the almost repercussion of learning that or experiencing that as a child would result as an adult in ways of like, let's say, oversharing.
Mm, Yes, it
Would that
definitely
be,
could.
that could be something.
Absolutely. Like
Because you
mimicking
learn that
that.
actually
Yes.
you're thinking that's there's no limits, right? Actually, there are
Exactly.
a lot of limits to sharing when you're like parent-child relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. There's, sharing that is relationally sensitive and appropriate versus just sharing to share because of our own anxiety, or like you said,
Mm,
not knowing that it should have limits or that we should be sensitive to limits in at all, right? But it also, one of the other repercussions, Robin, is that it can make us vulnerable to people that do that to us, right? So,
mhm.
like maybe we pursue
Yes.
relationships with people that even maybe minimize our own emotions, or maybe they vent to us in such extreme ways that they're not very sensitive to, like, okay, this person is getting overwhelmed. I'm not paying attention to them. But because that's so familiar, I don't say anything. I don't even recognize that it's happening, but I feel sick in my body and I don't know why.
Yeah.
Right.
Or we do that, or we ourselves do that because that's what we
Yes,
were taught.
exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So that's
Yeah.
the emotional
It's an
boundary.
emotional one.
I get
Yes.
that.
Makes
Yep.
sense.
Mhm.
So then there's the intellectual boundary, which Raquel talks about how, let's say you grew up in a family where you had to believe what your parent believes, or your dad believes, or your mother believes, or,
Yes.
like everyone has to have the same political opinion, or everyone has to believe the same things. And you're not really allowed to cultivate your own opinions, your own thoughts. Or let's say your thoughts were shamed or minimized. And so you didn't really get to, take it to an extreme version. This is where gaslighting can come in. Let's say you had a parent that would come home drunk and nobody talked about it, or your parents went through a divorce and nobody talked about it. So your intellectual experience of the world is impacted by that. So being an adult, you might be someone who values truth at all costs. I have to speak the truth because I have to name the elephant in the room, otherwise I cannot tolerate being in this moment. So it
Mm.
can also mean I'm, pursuing people that are always invalidating my intellectual experience. And so again, it's helpful to know what happens in our family origin, because it helps us understand what we're vulnerable to and where we most likely need to start setting boundaries. We need to practice setting boundaries. And so for me, emotional boundaries where I need to really step in and say, you know what, I'm overwhelmed, I need a break. But it was so uncomfortable for me to do that. And for my husband, like, he started setting boundaries with me because intellectual boundaries were really important for him. He's like, no, I really need to, this is important for me to share. And of course we step on each other's toes all the time. And I want to normalize that. And boundaries are not, you're not supposed to get it perfect,
No.
but being sensitive to it and repairing and acknowledging, like, oh wow, I totally just dismissed your opinion right there. I did. And I'm sorry, I didn't even realize I did that, but I'll be more aware and careful about that. And then
So what you're
there's,
saying, can I just go back to that,
yes,
Sylvie? So what
please,
you're saying
please.
in that example with your husband. So his intellect, he has intellectual, he has a very high need for intellectual boundaries.
Yes.
And so let's say he would say something, he would have an opinion about something,
Mhm.
and you might be like, your opinion's right or wrong.
Your
I'm like,
shitty
sorry.
opinion.
Yes, something like that.
Not that extreme,
No,
but
I know,
yes.
not that extreme.
Yes.
I'm not saying that, but
Yes.
that would
Yes.
be like, he just needed to share his opinion and he needed it to be heard.
Yes.
And that's the most important thing to him. It's not about like who's right, like right or wrong. I'm just trying to understand.
Exactly. You're saying it, you're framing it beautifully. Like,
Okay.
especially in the middle of conflict, I would want, like, I want to be right. My version is right.
Yes.
And so what happens is, if my version is right, then his version has to be wrong.
Yeah.
Right. So I had to really work on being much more sensitive to tolerating, you know what? We both get to have our perspectives. We both are right we have different perspectives of the situation, but in the middle of conflict, I lost all access to the skills. So we had to really work on that in the repair.
Yeah.
And now I'm just much more sensitive to, I'm you even actually helped me put something together in this moment right now that just happened recently, that I'm like, oops, I need to go back and make a repair about something.
Oh, see, and that's what it is. Like you said, this is not about like pussyfooting around each other. We're always going to make mistakes. That's what being a relationship's all about. But it is about the
Yes,
repair and learning. And the more
absolutely.
you do it, the more practice you have, the better you are.
And being humble and having
Yes.
humility and just being willing to say, like,
Yeah.
but
I'm sorry.
that's why I
Yeah.
love these frameworks though, Robin, because it
Mm.
helps us know what how would we even know that that's even a thing if we don't like have these frameworks to understand that they even exist, You know what I
Yes.
mean?
So then there's a physical boundary.
Yes. So physical ones are probably the most easy to understand, right? So
Yeah.
if you think about really highly sensitive kids, they are very particular about like how they want to be touched. And like, in so many family dynamics, um, go hug your uncle, just go, and so many kids
That's a
don't
good example.
right? Like, what if I
Yeah.
don't actually want to hug? And instead of like saying that to a child, maybe giving them more space to choose, like, hey, if you want to go hug, or maybe you say to the uncle, she's not ready for a hug, but she'll come to you when she is. And you're starting to set up that child from an early age to be really present to their bodily needs. And
I
if
love
we're
that.
right, like if we override
Yeah.
that, think about it like how those red flags can be missed. Like we just start to become more and more detached from our physical sensations that way.
It's so important. I saw this YouTube video and if I find it, I'll forward it to you. And it was
Please.
this kindergarten and the teacher, you could tell she was just such a beautiful person, but she
Mm,
was very aware of this physical boundary and teaching the children and honoring them. And
mm.
so when they always walked in the classroom and greeted her, and there was a lineup of children, and they could wave, they could handshake
Aw.
or hug.
Oh,
And
I
so,
love
and so
that.
they were the ones to make the call, right? So like each child like would be like, and then go sit down. She's like, hey, and then the
Oh,
next child was, okay, I'll do the handshake. Like, that's what I feel comfortable with. Like, it's just like, wow, that
absolutely.
is such a great example of,
It's
of,
such a
of
simple
teaching physical
thing.
boundaries.
Yes, I think that's the most beautiful example. And you're giving them options so they can ask themselves, what do I feel like I want to do?
Yeah. So in a relationship, can you give us an example of how somebody would be like breaking a physical boundary? And it may not be, I'm not talking about like physical abuse,
Yeah.
like just something that you're just like, oh, this person still just does this to me all the time and I don't like it, but they're just having a hard time expressing that that's crossing their boundary.
Yeah, I mean, I think with physical boundaries, it's when you're not really sensitive to how somebody wants to be touched, or you're not really, maybe they're saying that, they just need a little bit of space to themselves, but we're not really listening, and we're just trying to constantly like not necessarily pressure them, but we're overriding what they're saying, and we're just trying to do it how we would want to do it. So there's such a spectrum, and there's such a
Yeah.
range of how this can look. But like if we think about sexuality and like um how women have, through thousands and thousands forever have had to override so many of their own physical, their yeses and their nos because of
Hmm.
patriarchy, and not really even having the permission to be able to recognize, what feels good in my body, what doesn't feel good. So it's also like, touch me here, don't touch me here. This is how I want to be touched, and this is how I don't want to. Like having the ability to set limits around all of those things are ways where we can start to reclaim that, and then communicating those things to someone, and then having them respect that. And if they don't, that's where obviously our physical boundaries start to get intruded upon. And again,
Yeah.
there's a range of how subtle and extreme that can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would you say is the difference between a wall and a boundary?
Hmm.
And how do we recognize we might be using walls instead of nourishing boundaries?
This is another question that comes up quite a bit. I think we touched on this yesterday also during our
You know what? I
live.
think we did, and your explanation about what a boundary does
Hmm.
compared to what a wall is really good.
Boundaries are, if I'm in a relationship with you, Robin, I want to stay in a relationship with you. I want to continue our relationship. So if I set a boundary, that is because I want to express what my needs are so that we can continue moving forward and feeling good together. And I want
Yes.
to know what your boundaries are so that you continue to feel safe with me, so that you literally, maybe I'm calling you too much, or, you're like, Sylvie, stop, maybe you're like, even though it would be uncomfortable to share, or you would want to communicate to me, for me, checking in like once a day or once a week, probably feels a little bit better for me. And that would communicate to me that your pacing needs to be a little bit more slow. And so I get to decide, right, through that information, is that something, and that's kind of an extreme example. You could say something like, it really hurts me when you speak to me in that tone. Or if we're in a conflict, maybe you say something like, can you just lower your tone? I would really love to stay present for this conversation. It's hard for me to hear when when you're so high up there. And so I
Mm,
want that information so that I can do that, so that we can continue our relationship. So that's
yes.
how I think about relational boundaries. It allows for continued connection. And with walls, there is no space for that.
No.
It's very one-sided. It's the Gottman Institute considers stonewalling when we shut off a person from communication with us. And walls sometimes are a result of trauma or childhood abuse, and we might not even recognize that we're putting up walls. That's why it's so important to explore, you know as I take care of my needs and my boundaries, am I still able to have a nourishing, fulfilling connection, not just for me, but is the other person also feeling that way too?
Hmm.
Sometimes one person's boundaries are incompatible with another person's needs. So I think that's also part of the early stages, whether it's a romantic relationship or a friendship relationship. And sometimes walls, um, you know, are a way of preventing us from being vulnerable. They're a way of blocking us from feeling shame that we might be feeling. So just exploring, what are the intentions we're using our boundaries for, and are we able to continue maintaining a connection? And are we doing it in ways that are also sensitive and responsive to the other person?
So you mentioned spiritual boundaries.
Yes.
And so can you
Yes.
talk about that? What are they?
So spiritual boundaries are actually when you are not given the space to explore your own spiritual or non-spiritual
Mm,
experience, right?
yes.
So again,
Okay.
grow up in a household where
This
you
is what we
are,
believe.
this is what we believe,
And you're coming to church every Sunday or
right?
whatever that looks like.
Right.
Mm,
One of the religions that I admire deeply is the Baha'i religion.
mm,
And they actually have a practice where they support the kids. I don't know what age it starts, to do their own research, like to really
mm.
explore other religions, and to come to the decision of practicing on their own. And I just think that that's such a beautiful way of honoring a person's individuality and their autonomy. And that's a healthy way of really bringing religion into a person's life. but
Yes.
but it also can be, spiritual boundaries can also be violated when, like, a child is struggling, but instead of comforting that child and soothing that child and being present to the humanness of that moment, we're using scripture to bypass their
Oh,
experience,
yeah.
or
Mm,
spiritual affirmations like, you are above this, or something that just like disconnects a person from their humanity.
mm.
So those are some ways that spiritual boundaries can be violated. Of course, take it to the extreme if you're in a religious cult and you're literally being using source, higher power, religion. This is where religious trauma can happen. So
Mm.
this is one of the more, I shouldn't say more severe, because they can be severe in any domain, right? But spiritual boundaries are such a deeply personal experience that it can be really, really hard to recover from.
Mhm.
And I mean, that's why paying attention to the context, this is where group environments, being really careful with how people are practicing, and whether or not there's space for you to get to have your own experience with it, whether you decide you do want to have a spiritual religious practice or faith, or you don't resonate with that at all, is just so important.
Mhm. No doubt. So I've got a community question around boundaries. I often have a hard time communicating and relating with my sibling. It's
Mm,
heartbreaking, really. I've experienced them breaking my boundaries many times, even though I have been clear on how I want to be treated. They can be downright angry, get defensive, and very mean to me.
mm,
When I'm clear about how I want to be treated, they hang up or message in a passive aggressive way, pointing the finger back at me. I do not think they have ever apologized in our shared lives.
mm,
When we were together, when we are together, we have a great time, but I do not feel close to them because of these recurring instances.
mm,
Is there a better way I can communicate my feelings? And or do I just accept our differences and continue on with how things are?
mm.
Thank you for your advice.
Oh, this question breaks my heart as well. And I just want to say, firstly, I what you're experiencing is valid. Your inability to feel close makes so much sense. If someone is not responding to your boundaries, which your boundaries are what helps you feel safe. Again, if you don't feel safe, it's really hard to feel close to someone, right? And how invalidating it can feel to to receive that when you're trying to, again, we set boundaries to continue a relationship with someone, right?
Hmm.
So, there's a few options. I once worked with a client who was in relationship to a family member that was very intrusive, very just not sensitive to their boundaries, and just kind of was very just overriding of their experience. And this person wanted to continue a relationship with them. So we talked about
Hmm.
boundaries for a really long time. We talked about options of what they could do. And then it was up to her to decide how she wanted to take that information. And so there's a few options, with boundaries, with people that you've set boundaries with a few times and you've tried changing the approach, you've tried taking responsibility, you've done it all, and they're still not responsive. You can set consequences, not ultimatums. You're not doing it out of a punishment, but you can set consequences to, you're basically with consequences communicating what the boundary is not communicating, whether that means you spend less time with them, or you distance yourself a little bit emotionally, or you don't share certain things with them because they no longer feel safe. Whatever that looks like to you is unique to your
Hmm.
relationship. And sometimes, not always, the consequence can be a wake up call for the other person to realize, like, wow, they're pulling away, or they're really limiting their time with me. That doesn't feel good. I'm sad and I want to reconnect. Sometimes that can happen. Not always. If someone is committed to making us the villain in their story, then they're committed to making us the villain in their story.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then the other option is, if you are wanting to maintain the relationship and not really change anything about how they show up, it's so important that you take care of yourself in your interactions with them. So, with my clients, where they do decide to maintain a relationship, we work on, okay, after you have a conversation with them, whenever you feel invalidated or dismissed or any of those things, you take some time after that conversation and you validate yourself. You tell yourself, you know what, this is their limitation. I'm not wrong in what I'm asking for. And this is a sad limit of our connection and our dynamic. And I've done everything on my part. But just validating yourself so that you're not looping. Because what happens with people that are really invalidating, it can cause our brains to kind of loop and loop and loop.
Hmm.
And also another thing you can do is like reach out to someone that you do feel safe with, that you do trust, and maybe share like, oh, I just had this experience with my family member, and this is how they responded. It feels so shitty. And just ask them for validation, for support, to just be compassionate, empathic towards your experience. Journaling this, writing it down can be really helpful. But just, it's so tricky because everyone has to figure out where that line is for them. And it's
Yeah.
important that we're doing it in a way that protects ourselves, but also is aware of the limitations of who we're interacting with, so that we manage our expectations. We shift the way we perhaps relate to them in the way that they relate to us. If that last part is a little confusing, I know.
No, and I think that that's part of our experience of living and relating with people is that we can't change anyone else. We can change ourselves, but as hard as we try, I know my children are moldable, and that's my job is to grow them up to be that. I help with that process, but when it comes with adults, we're quite limited with changing each other.
We are, we can be vulnerable, we can stay, but it takes two people in a dynamic to want to shift it. And what
Yeah,
we can, what we all we have is control over our side of the street.
that's right. So, another community question around this is, what are some ways that those of us who struggle to set boundaries can work through that discomfort? Because, yes, it's not easy to
Mm,
set boundaries
it's not.
at all. Like, I don't,
No.
does it ever get easier? I don't know. Maybe it does, I think, but it's still can be very difficult.
I think it gets easier with people that are really that respond well to that, that make us feel
Yes.
safe and comfortable. Like I have a few
Yes.
friends that, oh man, I cherish them for how comfortable they make me feel for expressing a limit. I'm just like, thank goodness for you, because it's so uncomfortable, especially when you first start. You know, we can kind of go to the other side of the extreme, and our boundaries might come out harshly or even feel mean or stiff or rigid because we haven't expressed them for our whole lives. And so just really making space for that, that's normal. We can always repair that and communicate to our loved ones as an initiatory conversations, letting them know. I'm learning this thing about boundaries in therapy and coaching and in a course I'm taking. And let's practice with each other. It's,
Mhm.
it's really hard for me to say no. I don't know about you, but for me, like, it's so uncomfortable, and I would love, like, for us to be that source of support for one another. Would you be open to that? And then starting to practice finding the kind of languaging that feels authentic to you, because I think what happens is, especially on social media, and I offer lots of scripts too, but I always
Mhm.
say these scripts are meant for just a starting point. You have to, like, really work through and sit with the kind of framing that is aligned with your values, the kind of relationship sensitivity that feels connecting and integrity for you, and journal it. Literally write down a couple scenarios that you want to start setting boundaries with, whether that's like, I just want to tell people, like, I need a little bit more time to myself, and just, like, write out a few different ways, and then practice those in the mirror, and just kind of just say them out loud, just speak them out loud, speak them on a voice note, write it down, whatever version works for you. And then, of course, speaking them to an actual live human. It's natural for you to feel a little bit of guilt. It's natural to feel a little bit of shame. um, there's a couple challenges that I work with people on, that comes up around boundary settings, that are also like feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm not a loving person if I set a boundary,
Mm.
or I'm a controlling person if I set a boundary. And so getting in touch with what the unique story is for you can also then help you take that leap to start tolerating that feeling. And it does get a little bit easier, I would say. But I don't know, Robin, would you say that it's gotten easier for you? Where are you at with setting
I
boundaries?
think it's taken me many years to find my voice,
Mm,
to build the boundaries, and now I can pretty clearly
mm,
decipher, oh, there's something that doesn't feel good. That was a boundary overstep that I didn't. And it wasn't that.
mm,
That's the thing that I realized. It's funny. I just had a conversation this morning with someone, and I'm like, oh, that didn't feel right. There has to be like a good conversation that's going to come after that. But I have to think about it, ruminate over
yeah.
my wording that I'm going to use, because
Mm,
I do want to come across thoughtful and loving. And because it's like, right?
absolutely.
And then
Yes.
so that's what it is. I just need to take time to think about how I'm going to communicate it. And then, yeah,
And most people are not intentionally trying to invalidate us or violate our
no,
boundaries, right? Like, that's helpful to remember sometimes, because when
yes,
somebody does overstep, it can make us feel angry, right? Like, I can feel frustrated. Like, how could you do that to me? I remember I was at a party and a woman came up to me I just met her, and she came so close to my body that I literally, like, launched backwards.
yeah,
And I was like, how could she do that?
yeah.
But, like, I don't know, maybe in her culture, standing super close
She's
is
a close
totally
talker,
normal.
Sylvie.
She's a close talker.
I had a brother like that. He was a total close
Really?
talker, but not many people said back off, buddy. But some people did.
Yes. And we could say back off, or we could say, like, I just need a little bit more space. It helps me feel a little more comfortable in my body to have a
Yeah.
little bit more space when we talk. And so
Yes.
everyone has a
So many
way,
different
right?
ways you can approach it. But you're right. Like, I know for my brother, he was quite hilarious, and he was ridiculous, actually, how close talker he was.
Oh.
And a lot of people just like made fun of it. Like, no, not fun of him, but just like you make light of it. That was
Mm,
what I meant to say. It's more
mm.
like, saying it like, oh, like give us a space.
Yes.
And and of course he didn't take it personally, because he was a very confident person, but he didn't realize he was doing it
Mm,
for the most part.
mm. And I think it's beautiful to get to the point in a relationship too, Robin. I'm curious what you think, to get to the point where we are comfortable enough to just say it like that sometimes. Like, hey, leave
Yes.
me alone. Give me a few minutes. I just need to have some time to myself. Like, as we
Yes.
practice boundaries and there's space and respect and there's love, we can get to the point where we don't have to overthink it so much, right? And we
Exactly. We're
can
not
just
building scripts
be.
and journals and posting in the
No.
mirror. It's just like, let's get real about this. And
Yes.
that takes a while to build with somebody. But once you have that comfort, hopefully, and those are the people that honor you and you honor them. Yeah.
Exactly. That's a beautiful way of saying it once you build that comfort with them.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm just, I've learned so much, and I know that this is what you teach you coach all day long, right? And you're impacting everybody's lives in such a beautiful way. Sylvie. So tell us about your courses. Tell us what you're doing with clients one-on-one, and what you're up to and where people can find you.
Thank you so much, Robin. Well, the boundaries course would be a great place to start for anyone that's
Yeah.
interested in just even identifying like what boundaries would be supportive in their lives and how to communicate them, and obviously scripts like we've talked about, but support to help you figure out your own languaging. So I think the boundaries course is usually the place I recommend for people to start. And then I am actually taking on clients one-on-one for coaching. It's been almost a year, so it's exciting to be able to start taking applications for that. So if anyone's interested, they can find me there.
That's exciting. I'm
It's
thinking, I think I
exciting.
may sign up for this, Sylvie.
Ooh,
I
come to
love learning, but
me.
I also love like putting that learning to work.
Oh,
So I know that I need work in a lot of these areas. I know I do. So I think I'm going to be calling you right after this.
I would be
I'll fill
absolutely
out the
honored.
application.
You're in.
And then you have okay. I also read about this. I wanted to hear about your empowered dating course.
Yes. So that's a course that is very specific to the attachment framework. So everything we talked about
Okay.
attachment styles
Yes.
today it's a 12 module course that walks you through the beginning of your dating journey, how to clarify exactly what you want, and understanding how your attachment styles impact your relating style, gives you tools so that you can work on your own your own self within that framework, but also support with boundaries, support with communicating all of these things in the early stages, and just a ton of support to help you create really empowered dating experiences, I should say, even if you don't necessarily want a relationship, how to
Yes.
relate more powerfully with others.
And that person whose community question you answered, I mean, that would be ideal because
Mm,
it actually relates back to attachment and how that
absolutely.
affects your dating experience. Wow, great.
Yay.
Well, I just want to thank you again. And I truly, I'm giving you so much love and a big hug. I wish we were
Mm,
closer so I could give you a physical hug. No, maybe
me
not. That might
too.
be crossing a boundary.
No. I'll take the hug. I would love the hug.
But I appreciate all the time that we have with each other, and we'll do it again.
Yes, I would love that. Thank you so much, Robin, for your
Thank
time
you,
and
Sylvie.
for all of it.
We'll talk
Thank
to you
you.
soon. Much love. Blessings to you and your family.
Bye. Thank you so much. You
Okay.
too.
Bye bye. Please visit realloveready.com to become a member of our community. Submit your relationship questions for our podcast experts at reallovereadypodcast@gmail.com. We read everything you send. Be sure to rate and review this podcast. Your feedback helps us get you the relationship advice and guidance you need. The Real Love Ready podcast is recorded and edited by Maya Anstey. Transcriptions by Otter.ai and edited by Maya Anstey. We at Real Love Ready acknowledge and express gratitude for the Coast Salish people, the stewards of the land on which we work and play, and encourage everyone listening to take a moment to acknowledge and express gratitude for those that have stewarded and continue to steward the land that you live on as well.